Have you ever opened an email and felt the air shift around you, like the room stayed the same, but something inside you tilted just slightly? My name is Helen Whitaker. I'm 61 years old, a retired school teacher, living in a quiet Vermont town. I've raised 2 children, survived the loss of my husband, and made peace with more grief than I care to name. But nothing prepared me for that Tuesday morning. I was sipping my usual chamomile tea, thinking about the tulips blooming in my front yard, when I saw it Samantha Whitaker in bold letters, no subject line. I smiled. I thought maybe she was sending an update about the wedding, a dress photo, a funny anecdote, or a sweet thank you. After all, I'd already contributed nearly $30,000 to help with planning. I'd paid for the venue deposit, the florist she loved since college, and even the photographer she'd followed on Instagram for years. We had just spoken 2 weeks ago, giggling over centerpiece options and song playlists. So I clicked the message without hesitation. But the moment I read the first line, I felt a stillness inside me I hadn't known existed. Mom, it began. Just Mom. No warmth, no dear, no I love you. Just a label like a sticker slapped on a box. And then the blow, they had finalized the guest list, and after a lot of hard conversations, Samantha and her fiancé had decided it would be best for me to watch the wedding online, through a live stream, because Andrew's mother, who had met me only once, wanted a more intimate gathering. I read that line twice, then again. At the bottom, it said, "You'll still feel like you're there, promise. We'll send you the Google Meet link. Should be fun. LOL." My tea had gone cold by the time I finished reading. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the mug or curse the sky. I just stared. And in that stillness, something in me quietly folded. I had spent a lifetime choosing my children's first birthdays over paychecks, college funds, over retirement, red-eye flights, to wipe away their heartbreaks. I always told myself there'd be time for me later, but that email with its LOL and live stream made me realize something painful. Maybe to them, I wasn't a person. Maybe I had become a service, a background figure, a sponsor. I typed 4 words. No anger, no drama. Just quiet clarity. Sure, enjoy your day. And then I closed the laptop. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff watching the life she built drift just out of reach. But I didn't panic. I got up, I rinsed my mug, I combed my hair, I went to the grocery store. I lived that Tuesday like it was any other day, except it wasn't. It was the day I stopped pretending that love had no limits. When Samantha was born, I remember holding her in the hospital room and whispering to her, "You'll never have to fight the way I did." I grew up with just enough to get by hand-me-down coats, free lunch tickets, and parents who loved me but didn't have much to give. So when I became a mother, I made a silent vow my kids would know stability. Not just food on the table or clothes that fit, but the kind of stability that lets a child dream freely. That meant saying no to myself more times than I can count. There was the summer I turned down a trip to Maine with my friends because Samantha needed braces, and Daniel's school trip to Washington, D.C. had to be paid by August. I didn't even blink. I told my friends I had other plans, smiled through the disappointment, and told myself, there'll be time later. I drove a 10-year-old car until it wheezed in the driveway, wore the same winter coat for 7 years, and never replaced the sofa even after the springs gave out. But somehow I never thought of it as sacrifice. I called it love. I called it being mom. But now I see how dangerous it can be to call something love when it comes with invisibility. I never taught Samantha what any of it cost. Not because she didn't care, but because I never gave her the chance to. I showed up paid fixed and smiled, always hiding the struggle. And maybe by trying to protect her from the weight of our life, I taught her that comfort simply appears. That support is endless and expected. I gave her everything except the truth that everything has a cost, especially love that asks for nothing in return. There was a moment when Samantha was about 15 that I remember clearly now. She came home crying after being excluded from a birthday party. I held her made cocoa and told her she was special, even if others didn't see it. I didn't realize I was teaching her how to be comforted, but not how to comfort. I never told her about the night I skipped dinner so she could go to prom with the dress she loved. Or the time I picked up weekend tutoring just to cover her art classes. I just kept giving, quietly, proudly, blindly. It's strange, isn't it? The very things we do to shield our children can become the reason they don't see us clearly. Looking back, I wish I had taught Samantha not just what I gave, but why it mattered. Not to make her feel guilty, never that, but to show her that love is action, yes, but it's also recognition. Maybe that's the lesson I learned too late, that unconditional love still needs to be seen. And as I sat in that quiet kitchen after her email, I realized something else. I was done being invisible. I was ready to act. There's a strange thing that happens to women when they become mothers. One day you're a person with favorite songs, dreams, and spontaneous thoughts. The next, you're mom, just that. And slowly, so slowly, you barely notice the rest of your identity starts to fade into the background. For a long time, I didn't mind. Being their mother felt like the most important title I could hold. It gave shape to my days and meaning to my choices. But I didn't realize that in embracing that role so fully, I had allowed the rest of me, Helen, to disappear. At school events, I was Samantha's mom or Daniel's mother. At the grocery store, I was the woman with coupons and tired eyes buying sandwich bread and school snacks. Even in my own mind, I started thinking in terms of what they needed, not what I wanted. When I got a cold, I brushed it off. When I had dreams of opening a small bookstore, I shelved them behind tuition bills and doctor visits. I wasn't bitter, not then. But now in hindsight, I see how easy it is to become invisible when you stop asking to be seen. The truth is, I enabled it. I made it easier for everyone to overlook me because I stopped showing up for myself. I stopped reading for pleasure painting on Sundays or calling friends just to laugh. I told myself that later, when they were grown and stable, I'd return to being me. But time has a funny way of slipping by when you're not watching. And by the time I looked up, years had passed. My children had built lives of their own. And me, I didn't even recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. I remember one evening a few years ago, I was sitting on the porch while Samantha visited for the weekend. She was on the phone for most of the day planning something with Andrew. She never once asked how I was. When I brought it up gently, she said, "Oh, Mom, you're always fine." And maybe that's the heart of it. I was always the one who didn't need anything. Always the steady one. The background music to their big moments. Until I wasn't. Until I asked even silently to be more than just convenient. And it startled them. So when Samantha's email arrived and treated me like a box to be checked, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came from years of being essential but invisible, useful but not valued. And that day, after reading those cold words and sitting in that cold kitchen, I decided to change the script. I didn't need to raise my voice or write a long reply. I needed to rediscover the woman who existed before she was ever someone's mother. And the first step was taking back the power I had so quietly handed away. That afternoon, I didn't go home after work like usual. Instead, I drove past my street, turned left at the corner cafe, and pulled into the small parking lot of Maple Grove Credit Union. It's not a fancy place, just a brick building with slightly faded shutters, but I've been banking there for decades. Carlos, the branch manager, knows me by name. He helped me open Samantha's college fund, walked me through refinancing the house, and even sent a card when my husband passed. When I stepped into his office, I wasn't nervous. I was calm, clear, for the first time in a long while. Carlos smiled and stood to greet me. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said kindly, "what can I do for you today?" I sat down and set my purse on the floor. "I need to cancel a scheduled wire transfer," I said. He tilted his head concerned. "The one for the Windmere estate in New York?" I nodded. "Yes, that one." He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Are you sure that's quite a sum?" I smiled softly. "Yes, Carlos, I'm sure." He didn't push, just typed, clicked, and printed a form. I signed it with the same quiet certainty I used to sign permission slips. That transfer, $42,000, was supposed to be the second installment for the wedding. It was money I had been saving for years, thinking I'd give it to Samantha when she needed it most. For her future, for her joy. But I realized, standing in that bank, that joy at the expense of dignity is not joy worth paying for. I wasn't being vindictive. I wasn't angry. I was simply done funding spaces I wasn't welcome in. I had spent too many years believing that money was how I showed love. But love without respect, that's not love at all. As I left the bank, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't second guess. I didn't text Samantha to explain. I just drove home with the windows cracked, letting the early spring air rush through. A bird flew past the windshield, and for a moment I noticed how light I felt. Like I had taken off a coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing for years. It wasn't the money, it was the message. And maybe she wouldn't hear it right away. Maybe she never would. But I had spoken not with words, but with action. And that, I think, was enough. Later that evening, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed on the counter. Samantha, then again, then Daniel. Messages poured in like rain. Some angry, some pleading. I didn't answer. I just folded each towel slowly, one corner over the next. I thought to myself, silence can be sharp. It can be misunderstood. But it can also be sacred. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is, nothing at all. And that silence would soon echo further than I imagined, rippling into conversations I hadn't even planned to have, starting with my son. The next morning, I arrived at the library a few minutes earlier than usual. It was my volunteer day shelving returns, helping with the children's reading corner and greeting the regulars who always asked for mysteries set in small towns. It's quiet work, but I love it. That day I felt something different, lighter perhaps, more present. As I walked in, Janet, the head librarian, handed me a to-go cup. "Chamomile, no sugar," she said with a smile. "You looked like you could use one yesterday." I paused, surprised. My throat tightened. A simple cup of tea, and yet I almost cried. You see, when you spend years being needed but not noticed, even the smallest kindness can feel unfamiliar. I wasn't used to anyone reading me without asking for something in return. Janet didn't want a favor. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She just saw me. And that cup of tea reminded me how long it had been since someone did something for me without a transaction attached. It made me wonder how many other small moments had I brushed past. How many quiet offerings had I missed because I was too busy being everyone's safety net. That day I paid attention. I noticed the little boy who offered to help his mother carry a stack of books. I saw an older gentleman tuck a note into a mystery novel, a love note perhaps, or a memory. I saw life happening gently around me. And for once I wasn't rushing through it. That's when it hit me, maybe the world hadn't stopped being kind. Maybe I had just stopped being open to receiving it. When you build walls to protect yourself from being used, sometimes you block out goodness too. Reopening those doors takes courage and awareness. Later, as I sat at the desk filing library cards, I thought about the way Samantha had signed her email LOL. I used to think she meant no harm, that she was just careless with tone, but now I saw it differently. When kindness becomes rare, even mockery slips in undetected. It's not that Samantha hated me, no, she loved me in her own way. But she didn't respect me, not truly. And respect, I'm learning, is the soil where real love grows. Without it, love becomes one-sided, unbalanced, a tree that leans so far it eventually breaks. On my way home that evening, I passed the corner diner and saw Daniel's car parked out front. Part of me wanted to drive past to avoid the conversation I knew was coming. But something in me said it was time. Time to stop letting love excuse disrespect. Time to speak not in anger but in truth. So I pulled into the lot, turned off the ignition, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about Samantha anymore. It was about every time I let someone I love shrink me. And this time, I would not stay small. Daniel didn't look up when I slid into the booth across from him. His phone sat face up between us, blinking with messages he wasn't answering. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug the waitress had just brought over, inhaling the soft scent of coffee and cinnamon. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, without lifting his eyes, he muttered, "Why are you doing this to her?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, quiet, sharp. I smiled gently. "You'll have to be more specific." He looked up then, frustration already pooling in his expression. "The wedding. Mom. She's spiraling." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "You mean because I'm not paying the remainder of a wedding I was disinvited from?" He winced. It's not about the money, he said quickly. It's about you making a point. At the worst possible time. That's when I realized something that stung more than I expected. My son, like his sister, saw me more as a provider than a person. To him, my silence wasn't a boundary. It was a weapon. My refusal wasn't self-respect. It was punishment. She said, "You've changed," he added. "That you're acting selfish." It's a strange thing to hear that word, selfish, when you've spent your life giving until you were nearly erased. I thought back to the flu season when they were little, and I took care of them both while running a fever of my own. To the time I sold my wedding ring to cover Samantha's first semester in New York. To the birthdays I forgot, not because they didn't matter, but because bills did. And now, after all of that, one quiet no made me selfish. I smiled again, softer this time. Maybe I have changed, Daniel. Maybe that's the point. He looked startled. I don't think he expected me to agree. "I'm not punishing your sister," I said calmly. "I'm just done pretending that my love has no limits, that I'm okay being invited only when I'm convenient." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "You're adults now. You get to make choices, but so do I. And my choice is this. I won't invest in a space where I'm not welcome, and I won't apologize for choosing myself finally." He stared at me for a long time. Maybe for the first time he saw someone he didn't quite recognize. We sat in silence after that. Not cold, not angry, just different. Like a curtain had been pulled back, and we were seeing each other as people, not roles. When the waitress brought the check, I reached for my wallet. Daniel beat me to it. "I've got it," he said, and there was something quiet in his voice I hadn't heard in years, maybe respect. Maybe something beginning. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I didn't know what would come next. But I did know this: standing up for yourself doesn't destroy love. Sometimes it teaches it. It was just past 8 p.m. when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but somehow I knew. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there in his office clothes sleeves. Rolled up, his expression somewhere between concerned and agitated. "We need to talk," he said, before I could offer a hello. He stepped inside and started pacing like he used to when he couldn't figure out his math homework. "Emily's in pieces," he began. "She said you canceled the payment. The whole thing might fall apart." "Mom, why would you do that?" His voice cracked on the last word. I walked to the kitchen, poured him a glass of water, and set it on the counter. "She disinvited me, Daniel," I said gently. "Told me I could watch the ceremony online." He shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, but you know how Andrew's parents are. They wanted a small thing. It's not personal." I turned to face him fully. I gave $30,000. I was about to give more. That's not a guest, that's a sponsor. And somehow still not welcome. His face twisted, searching for something to say. What came out instead was sharp. "You're making this all about you." That phrase stopped me cold. Not because it was cruel, but because it echoed something I'd always feared. That if I ever stopped giving, stopped nodding and smiling and showing up no matter what, I would be called selfish. And now, here it was said by my own son. "Do you really think I'm being selfish?" I asked softly. He hesitated. "I think you could have handled it differently." I sat down, tired, not from the day, but from the years of being misunderstood. "I've handled everything quietly for so long, Daniel. Maybe too quietly. That's how we got here." I reminded him of all the quiet yeses I'd whispered over the years. The night I skipped my anniversary dinner because he had a fever. The weekends I gave up working extra shifts to fund Emily's textbooks. The retirement I postponed so he and his sister could chase careers without student debt. None of that ever felt selfish. And yet one simple boundary, one quiet no suddenly made me the villain in their story. Sometimes, I said, the people who call you selfish are the ones who benefited most when you had no boundaries at all. Daniel sat down across from me then. He looked less angry, more confused. Like he was starting to see another version of me he hadn't noticed before. "I'm not angry, sweetheart," I added. "I'm just learning how to stop disappearing." He didn't argue, didn't defend Emily, he just sat there quiet. And for the first time in a long time, that silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like space to grow space to begin again. And just as I began to hope maybe something had shifted, Someone else came knocking, but this time it wasn't family. The knock on the door came just as Daniel was leaving. We both turned, startled. He gave me a questioning look, but I shook my head. I wasn't expecting anyone else. When I opened it, I saw a face I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Lena Taylor, Samantha's best friend all through middle and high school. She stood there in a denim jacket, clutching her purse, like she wasn't sure if she should be here. "Hi, Mrs. Whitaker," she said softly. "I'm sorry to drop in like this, but I just thought maybe you needed to hear something from someone neutral." I invited her in, poured us both tea, and sat across the kitchen table where I'd helped her with homework 100 times. Lena looked around, eyes soft with nostalgia. "This house hasn't changed a bit," she whispered. I smiled. "Neither has the tea," I replied. She hesitated before speaking. "I saw Emily last night. She's a mess. She's crying, pacing, blaming everyone but mostly herself. And yet she still doesn't really understand why you're hurt. She knows you're upset, but she doesn't get it." That word get hung in the air like a slow echo. Lena continued. "She asked me to come talk to you, not to convince you to pay, just to see if there's anything she can say. Anything that might make it better." I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked simply, "Do you think she really wants to understand or just undo the consequences?" Lena's face fell. "Honestly, I think she's terrified of losing you. But I also think she's never had to think about what it costs to keep someone standing by your side when you don't invite them to sit beside you." I nodded slowly. That felt true. There was a time when Lena spent almost every weekend at our house, baking cookies, watching movies, building forts out of couch cushions. She called me her second mom. When her parents split, she even stayed with us for 2 weeks while they sorted custody. I remembered tucking her in next to Samantha, brushing her hair behind her ears. It struck me sitting there now how different this moment was. Not just in age, but in clarity. Lena saw me not just as someone's mom, but as Helen, a woman, and sometimes that's all we really need to be seen. Before she left, Lena reached for my hand. "Whatever you decide, just know, you mattered to me, back then, and even now." Her words landed gently like a quilt settling over old wounds. "Thank you, Lena," I said, "truly." And as I closed the door behind her, something inside me softened, not toward Samantha just yet, but toward the hope that maybe healing starts when one person chooses to listen. I didn't know if my daughter would ever truly understand, but I knew the consequences were beginning to ripple, and the biggest would soon be hers to carry. 3 days after Lena's visit, I received an email with the subject line, "Urgent, please read." It was from Samantha. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit in my inbox while I watered the garden, folded a basket of laundry, and made myself a quiet lunch. When I finally clicked, her words tumbled across the screen like a landslide. The venue had backed out, payment hadn't gone through. The florist canceled. The catering deposit bounced. Andrew's parents were furious, threatening to pull out. The wedding, her picture-perfect day, was unraveling, and now suddenly my presence mattered again. In her message, Samantha asked me to reconsider. She didn't apologize outright, not in so many words, but her desperation showed in every sentence. "We'll figure something out if you still want to attend," she wrote. "We're not closing the door." I read that line over and over. Not "we want you there, but we're not closing the door." An offer, not a request. And only after everything else had fallen apart. It wasn't regret. It was negotiation. As if my seat could be bartered back in once the bank account had dried up. I wish I could say I felt triumph, that there was some satisfaction in watching them realize how much they'd relied on me. But all I felt was a soft, tired ache, the kind that settles in your bones when something sacred has already broken. I thought back to all the times I would have moved mountains for her without being asked. How love used to flow freely, not be measured by transaction. And I realized this wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about dignity. It was about what I was and wasn't willing to trade for a seat at someone else's table. Years ago, when Samantha was still in high school, her science fair project collapsed the night before judging. She was devastated. We stayed up until 3 a.m., rebuilding it together. Not once did I ask for thanks. I just showed up because I was her mother, and that's what we do. But now I saw the flaw in that silent devotion. I had raised her to believe love always showed up even when it wasn't respected. That no matter how carelessly she treated me, I'd always patch the pieces. And this time I wouldn't. Because some lessons only arrive in the absence of rescue. I didn't reply to her email. I didn't wire money. I didn't show up. And in doing so, I gave her something I hadn't before, the chance to sit in the ruins of her own choices. I wasn't punishing her. I was letting her grow. And while she scrambled to save a wedding built on borrowed support, I finally did something new. I baked. I read. I listened to music in the kitchen. And for the first time in years, the silence in my house didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. And soon it would bring me closer to peace than any invitation could. Healing doesn't always come in a grand moment or a breakthrough cry. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly through the rhythm of folding warm towels, the aroma of cinnamon bread baking, or the simple pleasure of sitting on the porch with a good book. After the chaos around the wedding faded into silence, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt still. And in that stillness, I found pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. I wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. I was just learning how to live without always waiting for someone else to need me. I joined a beginner's pottery class at the community center. My hands were clumsy at first. The clay wobbled, collapsed, cracked in the kiln. But something about shaping something new from mess and water felt right. One afternoon, I sculpted a small bowl glazed at sea green and brought it home. It was imperfect, crooked on one side, but it held strawberries just fine. I placed it on my kitchen table and smiled. That little bowl, flawed but useful, felt like me. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it, then giving yourself permission to grow past it anyway. A few days later, I saw my young neighbor Ella sitting on her front steps, tears streaking her face. Her mother was yelling inside doors, slamming tension hanging thick in the air. I didn't ask questions. I just brought over a plate of warm cookies and sat beside her. We didn't talk much. We just sat nibbling cookies in the fading light. I'd spent so long being needed in ways that drained me, but this felt different. No expectations, just presence. And I realized I still had something to give. But I could choose how, when, and to whom. One morning, I opened a drawer and found the wedding RSVP I never sent. I looked at it for a moment, then set it down unopened beside a candle. Not out of resentment, just closure. It was never about a seat at a table. It was about recognition. About being more than a wallet or an afterthought. That paper no longer held power. I had reclaimed it quietly, and while Samantha may not have understood yet, I had begun to understand myself. That healing is not about getting others to see your worth. It's about remembering it for yourself. I started each day with soft music and lemon water. I called old friends not to vent, but to laugh again. The air smelled sweeter somehow, like something had lifted. And in this new lightness, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment. It wasn't loud. It didn't ask to be noticed, but it settled into my bones like warmth on a cool evening. And just when I thought the story had come to rest, one final message arrived, not in bold letters or desperate pleas, but something softer. A long email from Samantha, the last one I would ever read. The email arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. I had just finished watering my garden and was settling into my favorite chair with a cup of chamomile when I saw her name, Samantha Whitaker. No caps, no urgency, just her name. I opened it with steady hands. This one was longer than the last, a mixture of apology, reflection, and uncertainty. She admitted she hadn't understood, that she thought I'd always be there no matter what. That love to her had meant always receiving, not realizing the cost of what was given. She didn't ask for money, she asked for grace. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before gently closing my laptop. I didn't feel the rush to reply. I wasn't looking for an ending wrapped in a neat bow. Because life isn't like that. Sometimes healing doesn't come through perfect words. It comes from choosing yourself again and again, even when no one is watching. I had already done that. Through every quiet boundary, every morning, walk every bowl of strawberries eaten alone. This wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about a woman who remembered she was more than what she could offer others. She was enough. Looking back, the journey wasn't just about one disinvitation. It was about years of invisible giving. About realizing I had raised children who loved me but hadn't learned how to see me. It was about the day I said no, not to punish, but to protect something sacred, my own self-worth. I learned that silence can speak kindness, can feel foreign, and that sometimes even love needs limits. I learned that a woman's power often reawakens the moment she stops asking for permission to matter. And that peace, it rarely arrives loudly, but oh, how steady it feels. Samantha and I will have another conversation someday. Maybe it'll be over coffee, maybe in a letter, but I know now that I'll enter it whole, not waiting to be validated. Because the moment I chose not to fund the wedding I was excluded from, I chose something bigger, my dignity. And in that choice, I didn't lose myself, I found her. In pottery, in porch light, in quiet strength. And if that's all this season gave me, it was more than enough. Healing doesn't always restore what was. Sometimes it simply makes room for what can be. If you saw a piece of yourself in the story, in the silence, in the giving, in the rediscovery, I want you to know something: you are not alone. Your boundaries are not betrayal. Your peace is not selfish. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose you. If this story moved you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or reminded you of your own strength, I'd love for you to share it. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, because someone out there is still holding their breath, and your voice might be the one that helps them exhale.